I was sitting in a rental car at the airport parking lot when I opened the app and watched my daughter put something in my wife's tea. I didn't get on the plane that night. I told Paige I had a 4-day consulting trip. I drove to the airport, I checked in, and then I sat in that parking lot with my phone and just waited. What I saw made me dial the FBI before the cup was even empty. My name is Miles Hargrove. I'm 64 years old. I spent 35 years as a federal judge, and I've sat across from liars, those manipulators and cold-blooded criminals in a courtroom more times than I can count. I thought I could read people. I thought I was good at it. I didn't see my own daughter coming. Not even close. Let me start from the beginning. Diana is my wife. She's 61. We've been married 34 years. She ran an art gallery for 22 of those years, built it herself, managed everything herself, knew every artist she worked with by name. She's one of the sharpest people I've ever met. Our daughter Paige is 26. She dropped out of a business program at 23 and asked me to fund a startup she couldn't explain clearly when I pressed her on the details. I said no. She was furious. I figured she'd work through it. She didn't. When I retired 2 years ago, I thought things would get easier. I'd spent 35 years putting the job first. Missed dinners, missed weekends, holidays, where I was physically present but my head was still in a case file. Diana never complained much. But I knew. You always know. So retirement was supposed to be the reset. More time at home. More time with Diana. I meant it when I said it. Except I didn't stop working completely. I took on consulting work, expert witness prep, legal seminars. Nothing like before, no more months away. But I was still distracted. Still half present. And that gap, that space I left open without realizing it, was exactly what Paige walked into. But she showed up about 4 months into my retirement with an offer to help Diana wind down the gallery. Said she wanted to handle the client relationships, the transition paperwork, the scheduling. Diana was touched. I thought it was a good sign. Paige finally stepping up. I know now it was the first move in a plan that had been running in the background for a while. What I didn't know at the time was that Paige had $85,000 in debt. Some of it came from a private rehab center she'd checked into and left after 3 weeks. She'd never told us she went, and she never told us she left early. Well, most of it came from Travis Colby. He was her boyfriend, called himself a financial consultant. What he actually was, I found out later, was a repeat offender who specialized in attaching himself to people close to wealthy older families and bleeding those families dry through a family member on the inside. Paige was his way in. Whether she understood that at the start, I honestly still don't know. The first sign I noticed, and ignored, was Diana's voice on the phone. This was maybe 6 weeks after Paige moved back home. I'd call Diana in the evenings from wherever I was working, and she just sounded slower, like she was searching for words. She'd lose a thought mid-sentence and laugh it off. I told myself it was fatigue. She was winding down a 22-year business. Of course she was tired. Then I came home from a 3-day trip in March and found Diana sitting at the kitchen table at 2 in the afternoon in her bathrobe. And she looked up when I walked in, and for a moment, maybe 3 seconds, I wasn't sure she recognized me. Then she smiled and said she hadn't slept well. Paige appeared from the hallway almost immediately. She had a folder, printed medical notes. She told me she'd been concerned about Diana for a few weeks, that she'd taken her to see Dr. Grant Fielding, their family doctor, and that Fielding believed it might be early cognitive decline. She'd already scheduled follow-up appointments. She had a medication schedule typed up. I stood in my own kitchen feeling like I'd walked into a meeting where everyone already knew the agenda, but me. And here's the part I'm not proud of. My first reaction wasn't suspicion. It was guilt. I thought, she's been declining, and you've been in hotel conference rooms giving seminars. You finally come home, and your daughter has already handled everything. What does that tell you about who was actually here? Guilt is a powerful thing. It shuts down the part of your brain that asks questions. But for almost 2 weeks, I just accepted what Paige told me. I drove Diana to appointments. I waited in the waiting room while Paige went in with her, because Paige explained that too many people in the room at once overstimulated Diana. I sat in plastic chairs and told myself I was being supportive. I was being managed. The thing that finally broke through the guilt was Brooke Aldrich. Brooke lives next door. She's 58, retired nurse, has been our neighbor for 12 years. She's the kind of person who notices things quietly and doesn't make a production out of it. One morning, I was backing out of the driveway and she knocked on my car window. She had her phone in her hand and she wasn't smiling. She said she needed to show me something. She said she'd been trying to figure out what to do with it for 3 weeks. She handed me the phone. There was an email from Diana, sent at 11:47 p.m., 3 weeks earlier. And it said, "Brooke, something is wrong with the medication Paige is giving me. I feel worse every day, not better. I'm scared. Please don't say anything to Paige. Diana." I read it 3 times, standing there in the driveway with the engine still running. Brooke told me she'd tried calling the house twice after getting it. Both times Paige answered and said Diana was resting and couldn't come to the phone. Brooke hadn't known what to do. She wasn't sure if she was overreacting, and she'd been watching for me to come home alone ever since. I handed the phone back to her. I told her she did the right thing. I kept my voice steady the way you learn to after 35 years on the bench. But my mind was already moving fast. That night, after Paige went to bed, I went through the kitchen trash. I'm not going to dress that up. A 64-year-old retired federal judge standing in his own kitchen at midnight going through garbage bags one item at a time. That's what it was. I found 2 things that mattered. The first was an invoice from a private rehabilitation center. It was addressed to Paige. The total was $85,000, marked partially paid, with a referral line that read, "Referred by T. Colby." I'd never heard Paige mention a rehab stay. Not once. The second was 3 empty prescription bottles, all prescribed to Diana by Dr. Grant Fielding. Oxycodone and 2 different benzodiazepines. I checked the refill dates against the prescription dates. She had gone through 30-day supplies in under 2 weeks. All 3 bottles. I sat down on the kitchen floor with those bottles in my hand, and I stayed there for a long time. I'd seen Fielding's name before. Years back, when I was still on the bench, there had been a complaint filed against him with the state medical board. Overprescribing. It was handled quietly, a warning, a note in his file, and he kept his license. At the time, it hadn't meant anything to me. Now it meant everything. The next morning, I told Paige I had a consulting trip. 4 days out of state. And I watched her face when I said it. There was something there. A small release of tension around her eyes, just for a second, that I filed away without reacting to. I drove to an electronics store on the other side of the city. Not a big chain store, a smaller place that does surveillance equipment for businesses. I told the clerk what I needed. A 4K camera with remote encrypted access, no indicator lights, small enough to fit inside a standard alarm clock housing. He showed me 3 options. I bought the one with the clearest low-light resolution and paid cash. On the way home, I stopped and thought about what I was doing. Not because I had doubts, because 35 years in federal court taught me that evidence has to be clean, and I needed to think about what I was doing and why before I did it. Diana had written to her neighbor saying she was scared. I had prescription bottles showing she was being given 3 controlled substances at double the prescribed rate. I had a daughter who had taken out power of attorney over her mother's medical decisions while I was away on a trip. And I had a boyfriend in the background whose name appeared on a rehab invoice connected to $85,000 in debt. I wasn't doing this because I was angry. I was doing it because Diana couldn't do it herself. I drove home. Paige was out running errands. Diana was in the garden. I had maybe 25 minutes. I went upstairs, swapped the old alarm clock on Diana's nightstand for the new one, connected it to the encrypted app on my phone, and ran a quick test of the feed. The image was clear, wide enough to cover the bed and the door. I set the motion-activated recording to run between 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. Then I went back downstairs, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table when Paige came home. She asked how the trip prep was going. I told her fine. She told me Diana had a good morning, or that she'd eaten a full breakfast. She said it like she was giving me a report, like Diana was a patient in a facility and I was a distant relative checking in. I thanked her. I told her I didn't know what we'd do without her. I left for the airport 2 hours later. I checked in. I sat in the gate area for 40 minutes. Then I picked up my carry-on, walked out of the terminal, took a shuttle to the rental car lot, and drove to the far end of the airport parking structure where I could sit without being visible from the road. I opened the app. I turned off the overhead light in the car, and I waited. For the first hour, nothing happened. Diana was in bed. The room was quiet. The feed was clear enough that I could see the pattern on the quilt, the glass of water on the nightstand, was the old lamp in this corner that Diana had picked up at an estate sale years ago. Everything looked normal. Everything looked like home. Then at 9:14 p.m., the bedroom door opened. Paige came in carrying a small wooden tray. Tea and crackers, the same thing she'd been bringing Diana every evening for weeks. She set the tray on the dresser and turned to check on Diana, who was sitting up slightly against the pillows. Then Paige turned her back to the camera. She stood facing the dresser for about 20 seconds. I watched her right shoulder move. She was doing something with her hands, but I couldn't see what. When she turned back around, she was holding the teacup and stirring it slowly with a small spoon. She brought it to Diana's bedside. She sat on the edge of the bed and helped Diana sit up straighter, adjusting the pillow behind her back with the kind of careful, practiced motion that looked like genuine care if you didn't know what you were watching. But then she held the cup to Diana's lips and waited while she drank. Diana finished most of it. Paige smiled, set the cup back on the tray, and smoothed the quilt across Diana's lap. She said something I couldn't make out. Diana nodded slowly. Paige turned off the lamp on her side and left the room. I sat in that dark parking structure for another minute without moving. Then I called Lydia Nash. Lydia is a special agent with the FBI's Elder Fraud and Financial Crimes Unit. We'd worked together years back. She needed expert testimony for a case that crossed into my jurisdiction, and we'd stayed in loose contact since. I hadn't spoken to her in almost 2 years. She picked up on the second ring. I didn't waste time. I told her what I had. The email Diana sent to Brooke, the prescription bottles with the wrong refill dates, the camera footage I'd just watched, the invoice connecting Travis Colby to Paige's $85,000 debt, and Donovan Pruitt's name on the power of attorney paperwork. When I said Travis Colby's name, Lydia went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Miles, we have an open file on him." She told me Travis Colby had done this before. Not once, multiple times. He found people like Paige, young, in debt, emotionally vulnerable, with access to a family that had assets, and he built a relationship with them carefully over months. And he taught them how to manage a sick or declining parent in a way that looked like devotion from the outside. He handled the financial side himself, setting up legal structures through compliant attorneys that made asset transfers look routine. By the time families figured out what had happened, the money was already gone. The open case against him was financial fraud, but they hadn't been able to place him inside a family directly enough to make it stick. Until now. Lydia said, "What's your timeline?" I said, I'm 35 minutes from the house. How fast can you move? She said she needed 90 minutes to coordinate a team and loop in the county DA's office on Donovan Pruitt. She told me not to go in alone, not to call Paige, not to tip anything. She said if Paige sensed something coming, she might destroy evidence, or worse, accelerate whatever she was planning for Diana. I said I understood. I knew the house better than anyone. I told Lydia about the back door, the layout of the first floor, which windows Paige kept unlocked. 35 years of decisions taught me how to brief someone efficiently. Lydia didn't need me to repeat anything twice. We agreed I'd go in through the back the moment she gave me the signal. I sat in the parking lot for 90 minutes. I watched the camera feed the whole time. Diana slept. The room stayed dark. Lydia texted me at 11:08 p.m. "We're on the street. Go." I drove back across town, parked 2 blocks away, and went in through the back door on foot. The key still worked. Our Paige hadn't thought to change that lock. The kitchen light was on. I could hear Paige's voice. She was on the phone in the living room, speaking quietly. I caught fragments as I moved through the kitchen toward the stairs. She was talking to Travis. Something about the gallery paperwork and before he gets back. I didn't stop. I went straight up the stairs. Diana's bedroom door was locked from the outside. New hardware. A keyed knob Paige had installed sometime in the past few weeks, supposedly to keep Diana from wandering at night. I stood in front of it and thought about what was on the other side. I put my shoulder into it. The frame cracked on the second hit, and the door swung open. Diana was in bed, half awake. The room was dim. She turned her head toward me, and I held my breath for a second, the same way I had every time I came home lately, waiting to see if she'd know me. She said. "Miles." Just that. One word. But she said it like she'd been waiting a long time to say it to someone who would actually hear her. I told her I was there. I told her it was over. I picked up the teacup from the nightstand and moved it to the windowsill, away from her. Then I wrapped the quilt around her shoulders and helped her sit up. Downstairs, I heard Paige's voice change pitch. She'd heard the door. She was at the bottom of the stairs when I came down with Diana. She looked at us, then at the broken door frame at the top of the stairs, then back at me. I watched her face go through several expressions in about 2 seconds. Surprise, calculation, and then the mask. That careful, concerned daughter expression she'd been wearing for 4 months. "Dad, what are you doing? She needs to rest. You can't just pull her out of bed like—" The front door opened. Lydia Nash and 3 other agents came through. One moved directly into the living room, and where Travis Colby's voice was still audible through Paige's phone on the coffee table. One went straight to the study, where Donovan Pruitt, who had apparently been in our house for over an hour, was found sitting at my desk with a stack of documents and a notary stamp. Paige didn't run. She stood at the bottom of the stairs with her arms crossed and watched it happen. Her eyes moved from the agents to me to Diana and back again. Whatever she was calculating, she kept it behind her face. Then she looked at me and said, "I was the only one taking care of her. You were never here." I didn't answer that. There was no answer that would have meant anything to her in that moment, and I knew it. I turned toward the door and walked Diana out of the house. The ER team met us at the entrance with a gurney. Diana could walk, but barely. Whatever Paige had been giving her that night had already hit her system, and by the time we got to the hospital, her words were coming slow, and her legs weren't cooperating. I held her hand the whole way in. She didn't let go, until they took her through the double doors, and I had to stop at the yellow line on the floor. I stood in that hallway for a long time after the doors closed. The attending physician came out about an hour later. She told me the toxicology panel had found oxycodone, and 2 benzodiazepines in Diana's system. Not at a therapeutic level, but at a level consistent with prolonged daily overdose. Her liver was under significant stress. Her kidney function was compromised. They were starting her on a detox protocol immediately and would monitor her organs through the night. She used careful, clinical language. But what she was describing was someone who had been slowly poisoned inside her own home for months. I thanked the doctor. I sat down in a plastic chair in the hallway and stared at the floor. Lydia Nash found me there about 40 minutes later, when she sat down next to me and didn't say anything for a minute. Then she told me what they'd found in the study. Donovan Pruitt had been in the process of notarizing a document that would have transferred management of Diana's gallery account to an LLC registered in Travis Colby's name. The paperwork was dated 3 days ahead. They'd been planning to backdate it once Diana signed. Whether Diana would have signed it willingly or not was something Lydia said she didn't want to speculate about. I told her I didn't need her to. The trial took 4 months to get to court. Paige's attorney was good. She built a case around the idea that I was a cold, absent husband who had left Diana alone for years while I built a career, and that Paige had stepped in to fill a gap I'd created. She argued that the camera footage was obtained under questionable circumstances. She put 2 character witnesses on the stand, who testified that Paige had seemed genuinely devoted to Diana's care. I won't pretend it didn't land. Some of it was true. I had been absent. I had prioritized the job. Those were real facts, and the jury could see them. But then the prosecution played the footage. All 11 nights of it. The courtroom went quiet, in a way I recognized from 35 years on the bench. Not just silence, the specific kind of stillness that happens when a room full of people sees something they can't unfold after they've seen it. Juror after juror stopped taking notes. But one woman in the second row looked away and didn't look back. 11 nights. Paige entering the room. Paige turning her back to the camera. Paige stirring the cup. Paige smiling while Diana drank. At the defense table, Paige had been composed through most of the trial. Dressed carefully. Expression measured. She'd cried twice at moments that seemed calculated to land with the jury. But when the footage played, something changed. Her hands went flat on the table. Her jaw tightened. She stared at the screen like she was watching herself from very far away. Then Diana took the stand. She walked in steadily. 3 months out of the hospital, most of her strength back, all of her sharpness back. She sat in the witness chair, and she spoke clearly and without drama about what the past year had felt like from the inside. She described the fog, the confusion she couldn't explain, the tea that always tasted slightly off, the nights she could hear Paige moving around the room, but couldn't make herself speak loudly enough to ask what was happening. She said, "I knew something was wrong. I just couldn't prove it to myself. Because she was my daughter, and I didn't want it to be true." The courtroom stayed very quiet. On cross-examination, Paige's attorney pushed Diana hard, suggesting her memory was unreliable, that the medications might have distorted her perception of events. Diana listened to every question and answered each one with the same calm precision she used to run her gallery for 22 years. And at one point, Paige leaned over and said something to her attorney. The attorney shook her head. Paige said it again. Then Paige stood up. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood up at the defense table and said, loudly and clearly enough for the whole room to hear, "She was falling apart anyway. Someone had to make decisions. You were never there to make them." The judge called for order. Paige's attorney pulled her back into her seat. But the jury had heard it, and they understood exactly what they'd heard. The verdict took less than 5 hours. Paige. Guilty on all counts. sentenced to 16 years. Travis Colby, guilty on federal elder fraud and conspiracy charges, 18 years. Dr. Grant Fielding, guilty on overprescription and accessory charges, 8 years. License permanently revoked. Donovan Pruitt, guilty on fraud and obstruction, 5 years, disbarred. I was in the courtroom for all of it. I sat in the front row and I watched each verdict read out, and I felt not satisfaction exactly, but more like something finally stopping that had been moving for a long time. I visited Paige once after sentencing. I brought the paperwork disinheriting her from the Hargrove estate. I slid it through the slot in the visitor window. She looked at it. She looked at me. She didn't say anything, and neither did I. I stood up after a few minutes and left, and I haven't been back. We sold the Minnesota house 6 months later. Too many rooms, too many corners that felt wrong. We put the proceeds into a small fund through the county DA's office, legal aid and resources for families dealing with elder financial abuse. It's not large, it's one county, but Lydia Nash told me later that in the first year, it helped fund 3 separate investigations that ended in convictions. So I'll take that. We bought a cabin in Vermont. 3 bedrooms, a wood stove, a lake out back that's public land. The nearest town is 11 miles away, and that suits us fine. But Diana has a small studio off the back of the cabin where she paints. She's not running a gallery anymore. She doesn't want to. She paints in the mornings, and we eat lunch together, and in the afternoons I fix things around the property, or I read, or I just sit on the porch and watch the water. It sounds small. It isn't. Her hands don't shake anymore. Here's what I want to say to anyone watching this, who is somewhere in the middle of what I went through. Not at the end, but in the part where something feels slightly off, and you can't quite name it. Trust that feeling. Don't let guilt talk you out of asking questions. Guilt is useful for some things, but it will lie to you when you need the truth. And I spent almost 2 months telling myself Diana was tired, and Paige was helping, and everything was fine, because admitting otherwise meant admitting I'd left too much space for something to grow in. Watch for the small things. A voice that sounds slower. A face that doesn't quite recognize you for a second. A caregiver who controls access, who's always in the room, who always answers the phone, who always has a reason why you shouldn't be alone with the person you're trying to check on. Those aren't small things. Those are the beginning of something much larger. I was a federal judge for 35 years. I thought I was good at seeing what was in front of me. It turned out the hardest thing I ever had to see clearly was inside my own house. Don't wait as long as I did. The most dangerous person in your life is not always a stranger. Sometimes it's the one who knows exactly how much you love them and decides to use it. Loyalty is not guaranteed by blood. It is earned day by day by the choices people make when they think no one is watching.